Sometimes you want something so badly. You plan it, you prep for it, and you build this perfect scenario in your head down to the smallest detail. And then, when everything goes off the rails, when reality slams into your vision at full speed, it can knock you sideways. It can even spiral you into a depression. Most of us are used to thinking that every mistake is a failure. But not this time. This time, everything was different. In recent years, I've found myself starving for solitude. Someone hearing this might just smirk. Come on, man, what did you expect living in New York? And they'd be right. My world is concrete, glass, and an endless human tide. I am constantly surrounded. I live at the epicenter of motion, where every second has a price tag and silence is a luxury few can afford. Every day, I digest tons of information flying through fiber optic cables straight into my brain. I manage people. I sit through endless Teams meetings, followed by offline meetings where I have to keep a game face and stay on. And after work, there's another life, caring for aging parents who get more fragile every year, kids I take on weekends, trying to cram a week's worth of fatherly love into 48 hours, dates with women where, once again, I have to perform, present, and be interesting. Sometimes, sitting in gridlock on Fifth Avenue, I think, what if I just downshifted? Quit everything, move to a small town or maybe a farm in Montana. Raise horses, look at the horizon, and forget what a deadline is. But common sense, that brutal internal censor, quickly brings me back to earth. As long as my age and health allow it, it's foolish to throw away everything I've built over the last 20 years. The career, the connections, the firm, the investments. This is my ship, and I'm the captain. Even if the ship is heading for the rock. That's why the chance to get away for even a weekend to a cabin in the snowy woods, far from civilization and, most importantly, the internet means more to me than a trip to Paris or Hawaii would for someone else. It's not a vacation. It's a breath of oxygen before diving back into the depth. Despite my promise to myself to go there every month, okay, maybe every 2 months, I hadn't been back in half a year. Life happened. There was always something more important, an urgent contract, my father's illness, my son's graduation, work, kids, parents, women. We always give our weekends to others, forgetting the person who's actually carrying the load. But it was already February, the last outpost of real winter. I knew the snow would start melting soon, and the woods would turn into a mess of slush and mud. I couldn't let myself miss the sight, the smell, and, most crucially, that specific sound of a snow-covered forest. It would have been a betrayal of myself. That Friday I made my move. I cleared my plate, pushed my afternoon calls to the following week, and warned the team. As of noon, I don't exist. Don't text, don't call, I am off the grid. I stopped by at the ex-wife's house to see my kids and asked if they wanted to come. I wanted to show them the sound of snow crunching under your boots when there's no engine noise for miles. But teenagers aren't interested in that anymore. My son barely looked up from his iPhone. Dad, they don't even have 4G there. What am I supposed to do? They aren't interested in anything that doesn't have a mobile signal. They live in the network, but I finally wanted to feel like I was living in reality. So, I threw my bag in the car, checked my food and drink supplies in the back, and hit the road. Ahead was a 4-hour drive leading me away from the noise of the city and into a vast, white void. One last look at the Manhattan skyline in the rearview mirror, and that was it, switched to off. My Range Rover Defender was built for moments like this. Rugged, reliable, like a steel fortress on wheels. I headed north toward Lake Ontario, where New York State gets wild and dense, almost touching the Canadian border. The GPS dryly informed me, 4 hours to destination. Factoring in Friday afternoon traffic, arriving before dark was a pipe dream. But you know what? It didn't bother me at all. Quite the opposite. There was something magical about sinking into the night, leaving the city lights behind. I fired up my classic road trip playlist, A little vintage rock, some blues, the kind of music that doesn't ask for analysis but just sets a rhythm. My brain, which had been boiling over with charts and reports an hour ago, started to let go. It felt like decompression after a deep-sea dive. Once the main highway was behind me, I turned onto a secondary road, and then eventually onto the dirt track that led into the heart of the forest. I hit the button and cracked the window. A blast of air rushed into the cabin, sharp, clean, with the faint scent of pine and frozen water. The dash read 14 degrees Fahrenheit, but I didn't close the window. After the sterile, conditioned air of the office, this cold felt sweet. It was pitch black now. The cabin was about 20 miles away, the final stretch where civilization finally surrenders to nature. The sky was incredibly clear, dusted with stars you can never see in the city. The whole forest was draped in heavy, glittering snow. I flipped the toggle, and the roof-mounted light bar sliced through the darkness with a powerful white beam. The trees on both sides of the road emerged from the dark like ghosts in white shrouds, then vanished behind me. My stomach started to growl, and I began planning dinner. I had a few options in the cooler bag. My inner chef passed on the pasta and settled on something heartier: beef and bean stew, perfect cabin food. I'd toss in some sautéed asparagus. My ex-wife once spent a lot of time convincing me it was incredibly good for the body. Now it was just a habit, a culinary compromise with the past. And of course a couple of good beers. They were waiting for their moment. Hadn't I earned this peace? No diets, no lectures, no phone calls. Just me, the woods, and the fire I'd be lighting in the hearth in an hour. I turned up the volume on the speakers and gripped the wheel tighter. I felt like with every mile I was becoming a little more of myself and a little less of a gear in the New York machine. The white forest idyll shattered instantly. My headlights, cutting through the dark, caught a flash of red about 100 yards ahead. A Toyota was sitting in the middle of the narrow road, hazard lights blinking helplessly. Great, I thought. My mood for solitude evaporated, replaced by instant irritation. A woman jumped out of the back seat and, stumbling through the deep snow, ran toward me, waving her arms frantically. I already had the whole miserable scene pictured in my head. A broken-down car, having to take her with me to my cabin, the only place with a radio for 20 miles. Then calling a tow truck, waiting 3 hours, entertaining a stranger with small talk about the weather and engine trouble. Night ruined. My breath of fresh air was turning into a social obligation. "Please, help me!" she screamed as I slowed down and rolled the window all the way. Her voice was hovering on the edge of hysteria. "My dog's been shot. Some hunter must have mistaken him for a deer. He's bleeding out. And the car died. Something's wrong with the engine. The check engine light is on. It won't start. There's no signal, and I can't leave him. Save him, please. I'll pay you whatever you want, please. We have to hurry, I'm begging you." The flood of words, the chaotic gestures, and her disheveled look stunned me for a second. But years of running a business in New York had taught me one thing: when everyone else is panicking, your brain has to work like a cold processor. In a few seconds, I broke the situation down and got out of the truck. I walked over to the Toyota. In the back seat, lying on a pile of clothes, was a German shepherd. The dog was wrapped in a wool blanket that was already soaked through with heavy, thick blood. It looked almost black under my flashlight. The bullet had hit him in the side. The dog was barely breathing from the blood loss, just a faint, shallow tremor. "When did this happen?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "About 2 hours ago," she replied, looking at me like my next word decided whether the earth kept spinning. I started doing the math. The nearest village was 40 miles away. But is there a vet there on a Friday night? Doubtful. A real town was another 20 or 30 miles past that. That's an hour and a half of hard driving on snow-covered dirt road. The chances of getting that dog there alive were practically zero. The entry wound was large, hunting caliber. The internals were a mess. Even if we made it by some miracle, A small-town doctor in the middle of the night wouldn't have the equipment. I braced myself. I wanted to be rational. I wanted to explain to her, calmly, that there would be no miracle, that the drive would only torture the animal, and that she needed to, well, accept the inevitable. I turned to her to say those logical, correct words. But I met her eyes. She was looking at me like I was a messiah. It wasn't just hope. It was an absolute, desperate faith that I was the man who knew what to do. She saw power, confidence, and capability in me that I didn't actually have. Tears were streaming down her face, and her lips were silently, barely moving, whispering the same thing. Please. I'm begging you. My plan for a quiet dinner with beer and beans suddenly felt like something disgusting. I didn't explain. I just opened the rear doors of the Defender, and together we moved the dog onto the seat. I flipped the truck around. My perfect weekend was officially dead, but in that moment it didn't matter. The drive back felt infinite. I pushed the engine for everything it had, weaving through snowdrift. In the back seat, the woman, her name was Elisa, was cradling her dog, whispering in his ear, trying to keep him warm with her own body. I saw her in the rear view. Hair a mess, face smeared with soot and tears, and this incredible, almost superhuman devotion. When we finally tore into the town, the clinic was, of course, closed. Dark windows, empty street. I didn't give up. I leaned on a local patrolman for the vet's home address, and 10 minutes later, we were pounding on the door of a small cottage on the outskirts. The doctor, an older man in pajamas, tried to wave us off at first, but when he saw the blood on my hands and the look in Elisa's eyes, he just turned around and went to get dressed. The next 6 hours were the hardest test of my life. No New York negotiation could touch this stress. The clinic was tiny, the staff was non-existent. The vet threw me a gown. You're my assistant. Elisa became the nurse. I, a man used to managing millions in assets, was holding clamps, passing instruments, and wiping sweat from the surgeon's forehead. Elisa held the dog's paw while he was hooked up to a ventilator. We worked in a strange, silent trance. The smell of antiseptic, the metallic taste of blood in the air, and the rhythmic beep of the monitor. Around dawn, the doctor straightened his back. That's it, he exhaled. Bullets out, bleeding stopped. He has a pulse. It's up to him now. We wait to see if he can breathe on his own when the anesthesia wears off. Those few hours of waiting were a strange time of decompression. Elisa and I sat on the floor in the clinic hallway, leaning against the wall. We drank terrible instant coffee out of styrofoam cup. We started talking. Not about work, not about New York, but about something real. It turned out she was also fleeing the noise of the city, and that this dog was her only family after her parents passed. There was a spark between us. The kind that only happens between people who have walked through fire together. At about 8 in the morning, the dog, his name was Baron, shuddered and took his first breath. Deep, steady. He made it, the doctor smiled. But he needs weeks of rest. You can't move him for a few days. We checked into the only hotel in town, an old place with creaky wooden stairs. We spent the next day together, going to the clinic, talking more, walking the snowy streets of the little town. I forgot all about my cabin, the beans, and the beer. I felt incredibly alive. It's been 3 days. Right now, we're heading back toward New York. Baron is lying on a soft blanket in the back of my Defender. He's still weak, but he tries to lift his head whenever I say his name. Elisa is sitting next to him. She's holding my hand, and that gesture is worth more than any contract I've ever signed. I waited so long for this weekend. I wanted to be alone so badly, to hide from the world, to shut everything off. I planned for silence, and instead, I got a cry for help, a surgery under a single lamp in a country clinic, and 6 hours on the edge of life and death. My plan was pulverized the second I saw that red Toyota. But in the end, I helped save a life. And I think I finally found the one thing you can't buy with any investment: love. As we pull onto the interstate and the city lights begin to shimmer in the distance, I look in the mirror and smile. Not bad. Not bad at all,